I'm a student of cell phone intelligence.
Today on Mind Matters.
Greetings and welcome to Mind Matters News. I'm your Turing testable host, Robert J. Marks. The Turing Test, proposed by Alan Turing in 1950, is a method for assessing a machine's intelligence by evaluating whether it can imitate human conversation so convincingly that a human judge cannot reliably distinguish it from another human being. In the test, an interrogator communicates with both a human and a machine, usually by text, so the voice doesn't give it away, and tries to identify which is which. If the judge cannot tell them apart, the machine is said to have demonstrated intelligence. Our guest today is George Mappouras, who says the Turing test is not enough to measure intelligence, and I agree with him. There are some AI researchers that they think that while modern AI can simulate human-like conversation impressively, this does not mean it has actually passed the Turing test in a rigorous, sustained, and meaningful way. I don't agree with this. I think the Turing test has been passed by large language models already, such as Grok and ChatGPT, at least on a rudimentary basis. I think the Lovelace test, first proposed by Summer Bringsjord, is a good test of creativity, and creativity being a component of intelligence. Our guest today proposes the Turing Test 2.0 that is more rigorous, that it's a more rigorous testing of intelligence of AI. The shortcomings of the original AI, its reliance on things such as deception and imitation and shallowness, are one reason new proposals aim at setting clearer standards for detecting true intelligence. A link to his paper entitled The General Intelligence Threshold is provided in the podcast notes. Our guest today is Dr. George Mappouras, and he's the one that is proposing this Turing Test 2.0. I have his permission to call him George, so that's what we're going to do for the remainder of the podcast. And George, you're welcome to call me Bob. He was born in Greece. He grew up in Cyprus, and he is a graduate in electrical and computer engineering at the National Technical University of Athens, which of course is in Greece. And after graduation in 2014, he moved to the US to pursue a PhD in computer architecture at Duke University. Really great school. He received his PhD about a quarter century ago, and he is currently working in Silicon Valley, including Oracle. And this is where technically gifted people go to get high-paying jobs and maybe to get rich. George, welcome.
Hi, Bob. Thank you for having me.
Okay. I want to get something out of the way first, not to do with the topic, but we were talking before about what it's like to live in Silicon Valley. Everybody's heard of Silicon Valley, but they don't know very much about it. First of all, I understand it's a beautiful place to live. Is that right?
Especially for me coming from Cyprus, being used to the Mediterranean climate, the nice weather, sunny every day. Yeah, this is the perfect place if you want that type of weather.
Yeah, and what about it culturally? I mean, I think you mentioned there's lots of venues there that you can go to, and it's really rich, and it's a good place to get employment. Like if you work for one company and you decide maybe to go to another company, it's easy to hop ship.
Yeah,
Is that
exactly.
right?
Yeah, so I don't want to make it sound like a paradise. Every place has its own drawbacks. But this is the thing with Bay Area because of the companies and because a lot of employees are come from different places. There's, let's say, an international element to it. So in terms of food or entertainment, it feels like you can find many different cultures. So especially if you're not an American, I guess, that you can find things that you cannot as easily access in other places in the US.
Okay, is there a good Greek community there?
Not big because I guess we're not that many, but a good one. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I was telling George before we started recording that I spent many years in Seattle, and I think Seattle is a beautiful place. I'm not. I wouldn't care to live there today, but in the summer, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. And the joke in Seattle is during the winter, it's like living in a car wash. It's terrible. Now, George rolled his eyes. You think that the climate is better in the Bay
No,
Area
no,
and
no.
Silicon Valley?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Of
So
course.
I've visited. Yeah, I visited Seattle. I visited other places in the U.S. too, in the north. Yeah, I
Okay.
don't think I could permanently live there. Yeah, I'm not, I don't
Okay.
adjust well to cloudy weather or cold weather. Yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah.
I can visit. I like visiting, but yeah,
It's actually terrible in the winter.
yeah,
It's just
yeah.
gloom. In fact, I have my son and his wife and two of my grandkids live in the Seattle area. And one of the things that happens is that the sun doesn't shine, they don't get their vitamin D, and they become
Mm,
depressed. And they
yeah, I can see
literally
that.
have to buy sun lamps and sit under sun lamps and I
Oh,
believe take vitamin D in order to get rid of their depression. It's called SADS, and I forget what the acronym means, but it's this idea that during the gloomy part of the year that you kind of get depressed. It's rough. So
yeah.
I don't think you have that in San Francisco.
No, no, definitely not. Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever seen Alcatraz? By the way, do you drive by Alcatraz ever?
Yeah, I mean, I live in the Bay Area, but I visit San Francisco sometimes.
Uh
And if you drive by the coast, yeah, you can see it. Yeah, I haven't visited, but you can see it. Yeah,
huh.
I know there is some. I don't know if you should call them cruise or like boats that take you there as a to see the place, but I
Yeah.
haven't done that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would always like to visit Alcatraz. I've seen it in the movies, and it's very famous.
Yeah.
So let's get down to business. Let's talk about your paper. You wrote a
Yes.
paper, Turing Test 2.0, the General Intelligence Threshold. And this is a new and I think innovative measure of to whether AI becomes intelligent. You and I don't agree on everything, but I think that this is really an innovative paper. So let me ask you this. What motivated you to rethink the Turing test?
Yeah. So the first thing that started me asking the question was probably hearing people talk about AI and let's say describing its abilities without providing evidence. It was more like I feel like this is going to happen, so I was like, I want to see, I want to actually uh, find a way to test it. So the first thing is like, okay, let's see how people test AI right now. How intelligent is it, right? And looking at the Turing test, the first thing that made me, let's say, question it a little bit was that we have this interrogation system and we have a human and a machine. I'm like, okay, how do I select the human? Does any human
Yeah, that's a good point.
suffices? Because not all humans have the same intelligence, right?
Uh
So
huh.
do I get an average? Do I get, let's say, am I going to question you about physics and I get an expert in physics? And then what is the line of questioning? Because
That's
different
right.
people will come with different lines of questioning. And
Yes,
uh, let's say maybe for some humans, right, the machine deceives me. For some, does not. What if I take it even? What if I think the human is the machine? What does that mean? You see what I mean? So it felt like it had a lot of inconclusive, let's say, um, outcomes, which made it feel like ambiguous and like not well defined. So this is the first things that made me feel like this is not enough.
that's a
Yeah.
good point. By the way, I have a reverse Turing test. If I were to be in a conversation and wondered whether it was a human or a computer, I would ask the computer, "What's the cube root of 2,416?" And if it gave me an immediate answer, I would know it was a computer.
Right.
So, your point is well taken. If a physicist talks to it and he says, "What's the equation for,
Yeah.
I don't know, Newton's laws or something like
Right.
that?" That's different than from a kindergartner gardener talking to it and asking it about, I don't
Exactly.
know,
And it
puppy.
doesn't really mean that it's not intelligent.
Okay,
You can tell it's a machine, but that does not mean it's not intelligent because of that test. You see what I mean? Because
right.
if it can do intelligent things, but I can still tell it's a machine because of how it talks. And this is actually my second point that I started thinking about is we think about it through the natural language, right? I either speak to the
Right.
machine, and my question was why? Yeah, sure, humans do use natural language, but what about other types of communication? What if I tell you to draw pictures and I have two test subjects? They both draw a picture, right? Why do we use the language? It's like these things feels like selected without a rigorous process, right? Like we just said, okay, that's how humans do it. Let's just do that. And yeah, I think Turing test doesn't test if it's intelligent, tests how good you can mimic a human, but not all human attributes are due to intelligence.
Yeah, that's true. Yesterday I gave a talk before the Waco Chamber of Commerce, and I was joined by the CEO of a company called Worlds, and they do AI, where they do their learning from images. I guess that
Right.
most of the fuel for training large language models has been exhausted, and so this guy says, there's all sorts of information in the world if you just know how to extract it from photos and things of that sort. And one of the things he did, George, which I found fascinating, and I'm going to start to do it. I usually, when I drive or commute, I listen to podcasts. He said he doesn't do that anymore. What he does is he puts on Grok and has a conversation with it. And he
Hmm.
asks it
Okay.
different topical questions, and they go back and forth. And he says he learns a lot. He's become an expert in a lot of areas. So I want to
Yes.
start doing that. I thought that's a good substitution for podcasts. So yeah, so that's what I want to do in the future. One of the big things today is this idea of artificial general intelligence, AGI.
Right.
And I think that the definition varies from place to place. Do you have a definition of AGI, artificial general intelligence, that you go by?
Right. So what I that's one of the things. The other things I didn't like in this, let's say, research area, let's call it, is that everybody comes with their own definition, and then we don't really
Yes.
know it because if everybody has their own definition, how do we look for it, right?
Uh-huh.
So first of all, I like to drop the artificial, right? I don't care how it's generated.
Oh, that's
Meaning,
interesting. Okay.
so if it's general intelligence, if it's even general intelligence feels sometimes redundant, but let's stick with it, right? Is it truly intelligent? That's what we really want to know, right? And let's say we call that the human level of intelligence, but whatever that means. So if, if it's general intelligence or artificial general intelligence, if they reach the same level, let's say, it's the same thing. So we don't need two terms. So it's general intelligence, right? Uh, so this is the first thing that I noticed, that it doesn't matter how it's generated. Maybe from an alien species, maybe from a machine, maybe from a human, is that level. So now the important thing is to define that level. So let's call it GI for sure, right? General intelligence, and uh, that's the first thing that I try to do. Try to pinpoint it, and in order to pinpoint it, I actually looked at the human race as a system, right? So
Oh,
we can look at the human race as a system and think about what does it do? What is this thing that it does that we actually find fascinating, right? And we can look, for example, compare this system with other systems. Let's say another animal, like a dog, right? And we can
okay.
see how the dog, from its, let's say, from the time it started its life on the earth up to this point, how it lives, and we can look at humans and how they live. And we can see that humans have a unique thing, at least from the data we can get now. We see that humans started living, let's say, from caves, right? Putting up fire. Now we live in skyscrapers, we travel to the moon. So what we see is that there's an increase in knowledge, right? There's an increase in knowledge, there's an increase in information, and what I call there is the increasing functionality. Functionality meaning the things we can do, right? And I think that's exactly what actual intelligence, what actual general intelligence is this ability to look at your environment, get the information, but that's not enough, then extract knowledge out of the information. What I mean by knowledge, if you really know, if you really understand some information, it means you can apply it. So you can do some functionality. So an easy example that I like when I talk about this, I like giving is the idea of the anecdote we have with Newton and the apple falling from the tree.
Yeah.
Everybody sees the apple falling. That's not new information for anybody. We know that if you drop something, it's gonna fall. Newton didn't discover that. What Newton did is looked at this information and tried to get knowledge out of it, right? And the
I
knowledge
like
was
I, I like that example. of the apple
Yeah,
falling.
yeah. I
Very
think
good.
it's easy to communicate it,
Yeah.
and that's why I use it. And what he said is that objects attract each other, right? Even if we know that today that's not really true because of Einstein, right? He did that, and then what we from that what he it's not just he did that observation, but he got some new knowledge. What does it mean? He could apply that knowledge, and we can apply it to better describe how the planets move, right? So there's some functionality that comes from this understanding.
Okay, let me first of all
Yeah,
chime in. I think that one of the definitions of artificial general intelligence is having all of the intelligence of all the libraries in the world available to you at the touch of
right,
or at the query of one of these large language models. The question is whether general intelligence generates what I would call creativity. Newton's observation of it's a myth, but the
exactly.
myth
Yeah,
of him looking at the
yeah,
apple falling from the tree and then being able to be creative and actually extract from that, I think is something that AGI probably will never do. But I think that that's a good test for AGI above and beyond, just having access to all of the world's library. Now, you mentioned the idea of functional information and non-functional information.
right.
And could you elaborate on that and the difference between the two? You kind of touched on it, but if you would drill a little bit deeper, that would be good.
Right. So I think that's exactly like if we go back to this example, right? The the information that thinks if I drop something, it's gonna drop on the ground, right? If I hold something high, I leave it, it drops on the ground. That information exists, right? But what it actually means, not everybody knows. So this information is non-functional, as in I cannot get some functionality out of it. I don't know what to do with this information. But then you can think it's like a chemical reaction where a truly intelligence, an AGI, a general intelligence entity, can look at that information and as a byproduct, it moves this non-functional information and transforms it to functional information. And the byproduct of that is new knowledge, new functionality. So this is what you can think AGI is a system that takes a non-functional information, some information that I don't know what to do with it, and outputs functional information, meaning information that now I know what it means. I know that the reason things drop is because objects attract each other. And now out of this process, the byproduct is new knowledge, new functionality. In this case, it's the functionality of I'm able to predict how things move in space, for example.
So I guess I would say for the non-functional information that this requires creativity. That in order for Newton to extrapolate the idea of Newtonian laws of physics from an apple falling from a tree required a lot of creativity. Newton famously said that what he did was because he stood on the shoulders of giants, and that standing on the shoulder of giants is like all of the corpus of material in the world. And I think he had a library of something like 2,000 books. And those were the giants. He was probably referring to people like Galileo and people that preceded
Right.
him. But the idea of creativity was not contained in those books, but it was actually the top of the mountain. He got to the top of the mountain and then he added on to it. He came up with
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
idea,
Exactly.
this idea of creativity.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what you mean by the non-functional information. I think that does require creativity. Would you agree?
I agree. Yeah, I think it's a good definition for creativity, right? Because even terms like that, creativity, even the term information, a lot of times they have some ambiguity, right, inside of them. Like, what do you
Right.
mean by creativity? So that's what I like to do in this paper. I try to define those things, right? But rather than reusing terms like, let's say, creativity, AGI, um, new knowledge, all of them in the end, I try to find a, let's say, description that fits all these things. And I think that's what I try to do with this non-functional information and functional, meaning the same information, the same data may be non-functional for somebody because it cannot interpret them, it doesn't know what to do with them. And at the same time, for somebody else, might be a functional information because they know how to use it, right? And the idea is that, for example, this comes back to the question: how do you detect it? Let's say we
Yes.
have we have two humans, right? One has a hammer and knows how to use it, and one has a screwdriver and knows how to use it, right? And they can teach each other, right? So when they teach each other, what they do is that they exchange functional information. They say, look at this tool, this is how you use it, right? So they exchange functional information. But then, okay, now both of them know how to use both the hammer and the screwdriver. Is that it? So after all humans exchange all their ideas, is that it? Is information done? Can we learn anything new? And that's a system, for example, if that was the case, that would be a system that is not really intelligent. It's not really general intelligent.
Right.
A truly general intelligent system would be able to, exactly what you said, reach the mountain and then add something to the top. Look at the
Yes.
information, say, can I extract even more knowledge, even more functionality out of it?
I think that's good. I think it might be difficult. I'm a proponent of the Lovelace test. And the idea of whether it's new or not is sometimes very difficult because what if it comes up with an idea and this large language model or this transformer method, whatever you want to call it, has has digested all of the prose in the world. And maybe it comes up with an answer that is somewhere that it learned, but you don't know about it. And you look at that and say, "Oh, that's creative. That's kind of new." I think it might be difficult to determine. I think that this is a problem of differentiating non-functional information and creativity, even in the
Right.
Lovelace test. What do you think about that?
Right, I agree. And that's why I call it the general intelligence threshold,
Okay, yeah,
because,
so define that. I mean,
yeah,
that's the title of your paper. Define what the general
exactly.
intelligence threshold is.
So exactly. So I don't think intelligence means really inventing something new per se, because as you said, it might be out there somewhere, right? So, but if you can prove that, for example, you have a system that maybe you taught it a specific, let's say, class of functions, right? So you have a group of functions, a group of knowledge, and maybe you also give it enough information. So you tell it, for example, objects fall from the trees, and then you expect it to come with a new knowledge, with a new functionality. So that's exactly why it's a threshold, because, and this is actually an important part. Typically, when people try to measure intelligence, they have some kind of, let's call it, they have some kind of levels, right? And they say, okay, where are you in this bar from 0 to 100, let's say, which is very hard to define. Where is the threshold, right? Where for me, rather than trying to give you a score, I just have this threshold that is like, can you pass it or not? And this is the main difference. I don't try to give you a score. I'm trying to say, can you produce this thing? Can you showcase that you can do this? That means functionality. That means, sorry, general intelligence. And so what I ask for a system is, if I give you specific amount of knowledge, specific amount of functionality, and I give you enough information, what I call non-functional information. So information that you might not know how to use yet, but there's enough information there for you to extract new knowledge out of it, right? So this is exactly the example. Imagine Newton having all the library of physics behind him, right? So he has whatever he needs, all the information, all the experiments he asked for is there. And he has the current knowledge. Can he produce something? So let's say we have a system where we train it with what Newton knew at that time. Can it produce the new knowledge? Even if this knowledge is known now, it doesn't matter. If it can show that without looking, right? Without looking at the today's library, by just giving him the library of that time, can he produce new information, right? So this is the difference. Doesn't have to be truly new. It has the system has to show that uh, can produce new knowledge. And an example would be, let's say, assume we find an alien civilization, right? And
Okay.
maybe because typically people think about aliens are they're more progressed than us. Let's assume the opposite. They're less progressed than us. They're still using, I don't know, tools like living in caves and whatever, right? How could we tell if they are intelligent, truly intelligent, general intelligent? If we can see this progression, can we see that there's new functionality? Like before that, they didn't had fire. Now they use fire, right? oh, now they also went from using stone to iron, right? If they can have this progression of new functionalities, that shows general intelligence.
Okay. Yeah, this is interesting. There was a movie, I forget the name of it though, where we were looking at extraterrestrial sort of life, and the first thing that they did from a distant planet was kind of elucidate the prime numbers, and they talked about a number of the prime numbers, and all of a sudden we said, whatever is generating this must be intelligence. So that was the first step. Let me give you some examples of what I think would be good non-functional information. And I think this would be indisputable. And it kind of answers my question of whether or not this is hidden somewhere in the training data of the transformer. Recently, very recently, there was this 17-year-old homeschooled girl named Hannah Cairo, and she proved something called the Mitsuhari-Taguchi conjecture. Actually, she disproved it. But there are a lot of problems like this that are open in mathematics, and you can be assured that nowhere has anybody ever solved this.
Right.
And then a few years ago, 2003, Grigori Perelman solved something called the Poincare conjecture, and this is, I think, a 40-year-old prop, not 40-year-old. I think the Mitsuhari Taguchi problem was 40 years old, but the Poincare was hundreds of years old. And then Andrew Wiles in 1994 proved Fermat's last theorem. This is over 350 years old and nobody has ever checked it out. So there's all of these unproved open problems in math, including the twin prime conjecture, the Collatz conjecture, the Riemann hypothesis, and any of these, they are solved by AI, would I think be indisputable proof that AI was creative. And of course, what you would do is, like you said, you would give it all of the knowledge of mathematics. And if you go into like ChatGPT, and I'm sure with the other large language models, they can do mathematics now. They can
Right,
solve
right.
differential equations and Laplace transforms and do stochastic process analysis. It's really scary. So anyway, that's my proposal of something which is indisputable. So I'm waiting for a
Yeah, I
proof of
agree.
what. Okay. So
I
and
agree
what?
with that view. It's always like because they keep learning, there's always a question mark. Um, did somebody else have this proof first? You found it on the internet, right? So,
Yeah,
and that's why it's like as a test. If you really want to test it, sometimes we think if it's the model, right, that is intelligent, the
yeah,
software. If it's actually the software, then you don't have to keep training it. You can train it with less data and see if it can produce something we already know. And the reason that makes it easier is because um, we know information can what knowledge can come from this information. For example, if I give you a book that only talks about let's say medicine, right, and how to do a specific therapy, let's say, right, you should be able to get that knowledge out of that book. So by saying, okay, if the model is actually intelligent, we don't need to always keep it at the edge um, of today's science. We can actually go backwards, right? Say, okay, the science at some point was here. Can you produce what science produced after that?
yeah,
Because I know what to expect. I know where you are right now, right? And disconnected from, of course, disconnected from the internet, right? So this is actually one of my um, when I propose the Turing Test 2.0, this is one of the requirements is that you provide some knowledge to the system, but then there should be no other external functionality that comes from anywhere. Because that's how you can really tell, okay, nobody else gave this information to the system.
great. You talk in your paper about Searle's Chinese room, which I think is a smackdown of the ability for computers to understand what they're doing. I think that the general idea, but you use it in kind of a different way. Could you explain the Searle's Chinese room and how you use it
Yeah.
in your argument about your theory?
Yeah, actually, this is a funny story because it kind of all came together. I was like on YouTube listening to random videos, and I came across John Lennox, and
Oh, yes.
he was describing the argument, and it was the first time I was hearing it. I was like, "Wow, this is
Yeah, John
mind-boggling."
Lennox. Yeah, John Lennox, for those who don't know, was a professor of mathematics at, I think it was Cambridge, wasn't it? Cambridge University. And he's since retired, and right now he's kind of a Christian apologist, but he delves into artificial intelligence quite a bit. So anyway,
Yeah,
continue.
yeah. So for people that might not be familiar, right? The Chinese room argument is that I have a person that doesn't know how to speak Chinese. You close him into a room where he has no access to the real world, and you give him some specific instructions that explain him how to manipulate Chinese characters in order to form responses. And you have people outside that write Chinese characters. They slip a note under the door. The guy inside the room gets the note, he follows the algorithm, writes a response back without knowing what he's actually writing, slips the response back, and for the people outside the room, it looks like they can communicate, right? And John Lennox was talking about it, and he was saying why this is not truly aware of what he's writing, doesn't know what he's writing, right? And then I heard the counter argument. So again, listening to podcasts and stuff, I heard the counter argument. That's why I'm saying everything feels like it clicked together, because it's like if maybe the YouTube algorithm, I don't know, was showing me what I needed to hear, and the counter argument was like, wait a second, yeah, maybe the person inside the room doesn't know, but the whole system, the person in the room, plus the algorithmic instructions of how to manipulate the characters, plus the input output, maybe that's what makes it understand the language. And that put me in thoughts. I was like, wait a second, is that true? Kind of sounds true, but it doesn't satisfy me in terms of intellectually. So I was like, okay, what if in the instructions, so what if somebody slips him a note and in the note explains him how to escape them, right? Would he be able to act upon this information? And that's where the idea came from. Can I actually extract new functionality out of that information? So the guy actually in the room might be talking to you and seems like he understands Chinese, but he cannot act in a way that knows knowledge of the subject. Because if he tells him, for example, oh, the password in order to unlock this door is this thing, just put it and get out to free yourself, he won't be able to act on it just because it doesn't really understand Chinese. So that's where the paper came from, actually, through this observation that it's one thing to have information, it's another thing for the information to have knowledge of what the information means. So information can be non-functional. I have the Chinese document in front of me, but it's non-functional because I cannot understand it. It becomes functional as long as I can understand it and get knowledge out of it. And now I know how to use it. In this case, by opening the door, right, and the guy goes out of the room and is free. And this is what inspired me to make this observation.
Do you believe your Turing Test 2.0 has been passed? And what do you think of the chances of it being passed if your answer to the first question is no?
Yeah, so I don't think so. So again, I didn't. Part of the paper wasn't. I didn't, let's say, thoroughly test it. It was more like, here is a test, right? But as much as I tested it, it didn't seem like today's AI can pass it, right? And it's an important caveat is that a system, in order to pass it, doesn't have to constantly show that it can do that, right? It can just show once, like humans, for example.
Sure, sure.
They can show once, maybe in one aspect, maybe I'm good at math, but not good at physics,
You know, something
right?
let me interrupt
Yeah.
your flow, and then I want you to go back to it. But I would call this a flash of genius. That's what Roger
Oh,
Penrose
I
called a
like that
flash of
term.
genius. And it used to be in the United States, in order to get a U.S. patent, that you had to have a flash of genius. They no longer
Right.
have that requirement. But I think the flashes of genius are what you're talking about in terms of the non-functional information.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a very nice term. And you don't have to always show it. You have to show it once, and that's enough to show
Yeah.
that you're general intelligent. And again, all the tests I did and all the as much as I could look at it, it does not look like right they pass any type of test that is falls under the Turing Test 2.0. Will it ever pass it? I don't see a path to it. Let's say right. So currently,
Okay.
I don't see a path how that happened. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I guess I agree with you. Could you outline the three rules that define whether a test qualifies under the Turing Test 2.0?
Right. So in the paper, I defined three rules for a test to be a valid Turing Test 2.0. It's like a framework that can help you. You can use it to generate such tests, right? So there's three rules. The first rule is that a system we will transfer to the system through training or through hard coding some amount of functional information. And from what we talked about in the previous episode, is let's a group of functionalities. So things that we expect the system to be able to do. The second thing is that we have to give to the system information that maybe is non-functional. What do we mean by that? That the system doesn't know yet how to use it
This
to
is what we
extract.
called this is what we called before the flash of genius. It has to come up with something that
Exactly.
it hasn't been trained on.
Yeah, so some information that is not functional for the system, we have to know that the system doesn't know how to extract the functional, has not yet extracted the functionality from that information. So we have two sets. First rule, a set of functional information, it has some functionality. Second rule, a set of non-functional information. And then the third rule is that no other external training, external functionality has to be imported to the system. So after that, we can, let's say, try to interact with the system and try to see if it can come with new functionality based on the information we gave it. So to use the example we used in the previous episode about the anecdote about, okay, we have the apple falling from the tree, you can extract Newton's theory out of it. So the idea would be I give you enough information that we know it's enough to extract the new theory, the new functionality. Can you showcase that you can do that? And it's not just showcase randomly, right? That maybe you spit out some random thing that happened to be true. But after that point, you have to show that you can always reuse this knowledge. So an example that it's easy to understand is that you might have a, let's say, an array, right? And you might know how to find an element in an array, and then you ask the question, what if the array is sorted, right? And the system has to come with a binary search, where it's a more efficient way to search an array if you know that it's sorted to find a specific element if it's inside the array. And then if I ask it later, the next day or a year after, it has to know to reuse that knowledge. That knowledge is not lost, but it's able to reuse and say, oh yeah, if the array is sorted, I can do it more efficiently. I learned that. I can always apply this functionality from now. So it's not a
Okay.
functionality that will showcase one randomly, but you have to consistently be able to show that, yes, I learned this new functionality and now I can use it.
So again, I kind of equate the idea of non-functional information with a flash of genius, and I think that that's how we can tell that human beings are creative, because we've all had flashes of genius. We get a solution which pops into our head, and we're not sure where it came from. And history is replete with people that have had flashes of genius. I think one was Tesla for the brushless motor. He said he's walking along the beach, and he said, like a flash of lightning, it came to him, and he brushed off some stuff and or brushed off some dirt and actually drew a schematic in the dirt, the same one that he used when he published the paper. Friedrich Gauss said he woke up in the morning and said he had the solution to this problem he'd been working on, and he said he had no idea where it came from. And it also comes from the arts. People have flashes of genius, for example, of writing music. You hear people, for example, saying, "I don't know where it came from. I'm too afraid to examine it because I'm afraid it might go away." So we all have these flashes of genius, this non-functional information which humans have access to, and I think it is a key marker of intelligence. And you mentioned last time, which I think was very interesting and true, that you see no path to achieving this goal. And in fact, the attempts that have been made, AI writing better AI, writing better AI, writing better AI, I think it's been debunked. And I don't think it's conclusive, but I think there's just lots of evidence. There's something called model collapse, wherein that if you use AI to write better AI, pretty soon, yeah, you're not going to get new information, and it kind of becomes a blubbering idiot. But that's the source of another talk sometimes. In your experiments, you gave a bunch of examples. Why did you choose the task like drawing a clock at, I think it was 6:30, or generating a hexagonal stop sign? By the way, when I took my driver's test, I missed that on I missed that on the test. It says, how many signs do a stop sign have? And I missed that. This
Oh,
is
it was
back
an
when
actual question.
it was back when I was 16 and I missed it. It was the only one that I missed on the thing. I
Yes.
thought, well, it's a regular polygon, but I'm not sure. So I guessed wrong. So anyway, tell me about the 6:30 and the hexagonal stop sign, and what does it reveal about large language models?
Right. So this all again came kind of as a almost a coincidence. Things were I just in the previous episode we talked about the Chinese room argument
Yes.
and how it shows that the person inside does not have real knowledge of what he's reading. And this came kind of almost like an accident. I was watching the videos explaining what is the Chinese room argument, counter arguments. Then I see a random video where there's a person talking about a problem AI has, so that it cannot draw accurately the time. And the interpretation why is because uh, the images on the internet, which typically is what AI uses as training data, mass data from the internet, tend to have a specific picture of clocks or watches, right? That point to the what we call the 10-2. So the clock hands typically are in the 10-2 position. And the reason they do that is for cosmetic reasons. They assume that, no, they assume it's considered that this is the best image if you want to showcase a clock or a
Oh,
watch.
that's right. You go into a clock store, and if the clocks aren't running, they all have their hands at the same
Exactly.
place.
Yeah. And they
Very odd.
were talking about it in a funny way. Oh, this is funny. All the images are like that. AI cannot produce other images easily. And I was like,
Oh,
wait a second. That's interesting. So they were actually being very, let's say, very casual about it. But I was like, this is very interesting. Why it cannot? Right? It's something very simple. So then, looking at what we already discussed, I said, wait a second. Does AI though know how a clock works? Because if you know how a clock works, that's enough information to draw any picture. So then I went back to the AI and I followed the Turing Test rules, the Turing Test 2.0 rules, right? And I said, okay, can you draw images? Yes, you can draw images. So this is the functionality it already has. Can you draw images of a clock? It can. It can. It gives you very nice images of clocks. It already has this functionality. This is the number one, my first rule for the Turing Test 2.0. So then I looked at non-functional information, meaning is that information that it's enough if you know that if you really understand it to draw any clock.
oh, that's
And
a
that,
great
so
example.
so
Yes.
I, so I asked the AI, how does the clock work? They give a perfect description of how the clock works with the minutes, seconds, everything. And even you can ask it, can you tell me where the hands of the clock are gonna be if it's 6:30? And they will describe it in detail accurately. They'll tell you, oh, the hour should point at 6, the a little bit past 6. Actually, they're very accurate. A little bit past 6, and the minute hand will point at 6 because it's 6 times 5 is 10. So I was like, oh, all right, you have all the information you need. You pretty much gave me the image, but in a text form. So then I will ask you to generate that image that I described, and it fails. It gives you a random a 1010 or something close by, and that shows that it doesn't have understanding. Right? It cannot extract the meaning of the things it's giving you. So if it doesn't have a meaning, how can it get functionality out of it? Right? And this is the third rule. Now, this is where the third rule can break. The third rule says of the Turing Test 2.0 says there should be no other external functionality come from, right? So one can think that this problem is kind of simple actually to fix. We just have to balance our data set, the training set, give you more images of different times, label them correctly, train the model, and fix this problem. The problem is easy to fix, yes, but then you're not testing for intelligence anymore because you broke the third rule. You gave it external information. So that's why it's a good uh, test, is because of how the nature of the data that are used for these large models. They go to the internet and get what is out there, pretty much.
I like this very much.
Yeah.
Here's an idea that popped into my mind. If all the literature in the world said that the world was flat, and but it also knew things like, well, the North Star changes as you travel, and that when ships disappear in the distance, that they disappear from the bottom to the top, and it could take that information and say, this idea of a flat Earth, it doesn't line up with these sort of things. So it's that sort of correlation that will generate this non-functional information. Tell me about the hexagonal stop sign. Same sort of
Right.
thing.
Right. So after I noticed the behavior with the 6:30, right, with the clock, I wanted to make sure first that this is not just something random I stumbled upon, but I can actually reproduce it with other images, right? So what was unique about the 630, that we have an image that is very, let's say, dominant in the data set. So I asked myself, what other images we have that are dominant like that? And I started thinking about cases. Actually, the paper, I give other examples too that I didn't really present in the paper, but I'm like, you can try them out if you want. And one of them that came to my mind was like the stop sign. So if you look at a stop sign, it has a very specific image, right? It has typically has it's an octagon, uh, and it has a very specific, like you have a red sign, white letters. So I'm like, okay, the AI has seen that image many many times. There's likely hasn't seen some specific shapes. For example, what if it's a hexagonal? What if I wanted to do the same exact thing, but this time in a hexagonal shape? And I noticed that AI had big difficulty doing that. When I tested different models, ChatGPT, if you insist a lot, it was able to produce an image. But then if you reset your chat, it would fail again, and you have to try hard to make it produce the same image again, the correct image again. So it's what I said before, is that if you really want to pass the Turing Test 2.0, you have to see that if you extract some knowledge, that knowledge doesn't go away, but you are able to apply it again. And there are other things like that you can kind of play with, like, for example, um, in triangular flat screen, right?
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
because flat screens typically have a specific shape, or a not driver license, a car license plate in weird shapes. So sometimes, depending, because for example, you can think that, oh, there are different signs in different shapes. AI is very good at let's say, correlation, right?
Yes.
Getting one thing, applying the other thing on top of it. So there is a niche there that you can start looking at, and looking at these images that are very, very unique.
So this is very interesting because as a watcher of sitcoms, it was either on The Office or Arrested Development, where they came up with this. I think it was The Office. They came up with this idea for a triangular screen. So
I kind of, yeah.
I'm wondering, if that exists. But if it did exist, certainly that the large language models didn't catch up on that. My experience, George, is that a lot of these large language models go and they put band-aids on things, and stuff that didn't work last year kind of worked this year. A classic example, I was informed, and I checked it out, and it was true. uh, and it was Tom's mother has three kids: Snap, Crackle, and now if you know about Rice Krispies, their logo is Snap, Crackle, and Pop. So yeah, Pop was the last one. Tom's mother had three kids, Snap, Crackle, and well, of course, it was Tom's mother. So it was Tom. It should have been Snap, Crackle, and Tom. So this was something that was answered incorrectly a long time ago, but it was corrected. Somebody went in, and I don't think it was training. I think it was a human being that went in and corrected that. I suspect that if they do correct that if they do identify the problems that you're talking about, people at OpenAI or Grok are going to come in and they're going to put a band-aid on this and fix it. But it's going to be a human intervention. It isn't an epiphany of the AI, is it?
Exactly. This breaks actually the third rule of the Turing Test 2.0, because what will happen is that external sources, in this case humans, will come and give this functionality to AI. And that's why it's important to preserve the third rule. And that's why these tests, yeah, they're nice, but very likely they're gonna go away as we add more functionality um, on AI systems.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is being done by human beings behind the scene. They go in and
Exactly.
they
Yeah.
kind of they tune all the errors. In fact, if you go to some of these large language models and they make a mistake, you can say you made a mistake, blah blah blah, and they will come back and they'll go, "Oh, you're exactly right," and they'll fix it, and the next time you won't see that same mistake again. So it is apparently self-correcting. I hope that it verifies it before it corrects, but it is self-verifying, and also I think that humans are that way. One of the things that I tried a long time ago is to tell ChatGPT not to do something. I said, draw a picture of Times Square with no pink elephants or no pink rhinoceroses. I think it was,
Mm.
and I says, no pink rhinoceroses. I don't want. It didn't know how to not do that. So give me a picture of Times Square with a rhinoceros in it, a pink rhinoceros. And I tried it on a bunch of other things, but they have fixed that then. I retried it, and I don't know if it came to the attention of the people that do these images, but I tried it, just a few months ago, and I said, no pink rhinoceroses, and it recognized it. So somebody behind the scenes is dinking with this stuff, making it
Right.
more and more accessible. So that's interesting. So let me
Okay.
ask you about this. You talk about, I think it's Cholet, Chollet. How would that be pronounced? Do you know?
Slay,
Cholet's
sorry.
definition of intelligence. Francois
Oh,
Cholet.
oh
Or is
yeah.
it?
I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Okay,
I want to say it's
Let,
French. So
let's
yeah.
let's go with
I would say
American.
Collet. Yeah, but I don't know. Yeah.
Collet.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm in Texas. We have this road here called Pogue, which of course is French and it should be Poge, but everybody calls it Pogue. It's Pogue Road. And there's another one, Bosque, which is should be Bosque, I believe, but everybody calls it Bosque. So
I'm the
everybody,
last person to judge about accents. So you can take it away.
okay, so we'll call it Collet's definition, and we
Right.
apologize to Francois. I got his first name, Francois Collet, uh, about this. He was a employee of Google when he published this, and he proposed a definition of intelligence, and you talk about that in your paper. Could you unpack this? I found this as interesting, and I confess I had not heard of this definition of intelligence, and
Yeah.
I kind of like it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
go ahead.
Actually, when first started digging around, I came across his paper, and I found it very interesting. It actually has a whole benchmark, so it's more detailed. As in, it's a whole benchmark that you can actually apply to a model and see how good it does. So the difference there is that Colette comes with a specific test, which a lot of people do, but his test is a little bit different than other researchers. And he says, I have this type of tests that are like kind of unique, meaning it's kind of like playing a game that you haven't really seen before. Okay,
Yes.
and these games, if you can actually, if somebody Google's Colette's work, they can go to the website. They can even play the games themselves. So it pops up on your web, and you can actually do the test yourself to test yourself. And it's actually pretty much what I would call IQ tests. If anybody is familiar with IQ tests, they will probably get an idea of what I mean, where you have some patterns and then you have to predict the next one. So it gives you, but rather than being random numbers or whatever, it's let's say it's adjusted for computers. So you have pretty much, let's say, a grid with each grid has some squares inside, and the squares have colors and positions in the grid, and it gives you, let's say, three different variations where the squares in the grid from one variation to another, they change either in colors or in position. And what you have to do is detect this pattern and predict the fourth grid. So that's why I'm saying it's like, if anybody ever solved a Q test, it's very similar. It's like a Q test adjusted for computers. That's the description I would give. And it's very nice because you test a computer if you can kind of reason in a way. That's how it feels like. And a lot of other people did other tests. The other tests that, to be honest, why I like college is that because other tests might be something like, for example, people proposed, um, can you get inside a typical house and find the coffee machine and make coffee? Okay, good, but why is that intelligent, right? College has a little bit more close to intelligence because you're trying to reason and find something that needs you to what we call think, right? What I don't like about this, though, it's the major thing that I think is common almost to all peer work in this field is that we compare in order to figure out if it's clever enough, if it reaches the general intelligence, we compare it to human results. And I'm like, okay, again, which human? The average human? Should we get the
Right.
smartest?
A guy that
And
goes to a kindergarten kid. Yeah.
exactly. And even a human that is not smart in this way might be smart in another way. I've seen it through my friends and family that somebody might be not as good in math, maybe very good at physics, maybe not good at physics, very good at painting, maybe not painting, maybe sports. And you can see the intelligence there. You can see how they innovate. So that's why I don't like these very specific, very tailored tests because, okay, it's a specific type of intelligence. And the other thing that, because I've taken tests like that before, IQ tests for different exams and stuff. If you take the test the first time, you're probably not going to do so well. The second time, you're going to do better. The third time, even better. Am I becoming smarter?
Sure.
Or am I just training and learning the patterns? You see what I mean? So if I'm learning the patterns, then sure AI can do that. We know they can do that, but that's not what we're seeking to find. If it can learn patterns, yeah, the AI, as the more you train it with this type of test, it will do better. Eventually, probably better than humans. But yeah, I recognize patterns, not real intelligence. Because if a test, every time you take it, you can do it a little bit better, then it's just training. And this is my biggest, let's say, objection to this type. It's a very nice test, but like the Turing test, like the original Turing test, I think it doesn't really measure intelligence, and that's my biggest, let's say, critique is that why we test machines on things we are good at, right, and not the
Yeah.
machine. For example, there was a time where the machines were not good at doing high precision math; they could only
Yes.
do a small precision. We actually used to use humans for high precision, right?
Yeah.
Then they became better than us.
And they were known as
What
computers, I think, right?
exactly? Yeah. So
Mhm.
why don't we use that test? Computer is very good at it, right? What if I wanted the same action repeated precisely over and over again? Humans are terrible at it. Machines are great at it. But and that's exactly how I came with the Turing Test 2.0. I was like, in order to be able to get with a test, I first have to define what does it mean to be intelligent? What does it mean to be general intelligent? What is this thing we're looking for? And that's how we, as we discussed in the previous episode, I came with this idea of what we call creativity, and I define it as being able to extract new knowledge out of existing information. Information you already have. So it's not like you need to go get other new information that you don't have. I already gave you that information. Can you extract new knowledge? What does it mean knowledge? So it means, can you apply what you learn? Did you get new functionality out of it? And this is actually how good teachers test students. Like in an exam, what is a good exam is to show that what they learn, they can apply it in a different environment, right? You can see that, okay, you learn, let's say, the Fourier transform. Okay, here is a problem. I'm not going to tell you that the Fourier transform is needed, but you have to think about it. Be like, oh, here, this is a good solution. Can I apply it? If you applied it correctly, it means you have knowledge of it, right? So this is what it means to extract new knowledge out of it. And I like that because you can see actually how some teachers teach. Some teachers, when they teach, they don't tell you the solution. They try to guide the students to the solution, and they will tell
Yes.
you, think about this. So, for example, we talked about example the binary search that works in a sorted array, and the teacher,
What kind of search again?
the binary search, when you try to search
Binary search.
an element in a sorted array, and you can do it faster than just simply checking each element individually, right?
Okay.
And maybe the students don't know about the binary search, and the teachers try to teach them, and it says, "What about if the array is sorted?" And the students don't know what to do, and then tell them, "What if I pick a random element in the array? What can I learn from that?" And then the students will be like, "Oh, a random element. Oh, because it's sorted, what I'm looking for it would either be on the right or the left of this element," and then they can kind of lead them, right? So they can extract themselves, and that's what I'm trying to find as intelligence, being able to, if I give you just enough information, can you extract the knowledge, new functionality, then you can consistently apply this new functionality from that point on, you can apply it uh, to similar problems.
I like that. That's very much. Yeah, Collet I thought was very intriguing. I think in the early days of AI, one of the examples would be if you specifically taught a AI to play, for example, checkers on an 8x8 checkerboard. And this was pointed out, I think, first by Gary Smith at Pomona. And unless you program that generality into the checkers playing thing, if you gave it, instead of an 8x8 checkerboard, you gave it a 6x6 checkerboard, it would have no idea how to generalize to it.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
that's an example also. Okay. Very interesting. By the way, you mentioned Fourier, so I now feel justified in referencing my book, Handbook of Fourier Analysis and its Applications, in the podcast notes for those that want to learn about Fourier transforms. You never hesitate to advertise your books, so I will. I will go ahead and do that. I would point out that George has mentioned that his test has not been achieved. He doesn't see a path to it. I'm a proponent of the Lovelace test. That hasn't been proven yet or demonstrated. And I think for the Collet that we just discussed, that hasn't been proven yet. In fact, I read that, and I don't know if this is true or not, that Collet deliberately designed his theory so that current AI approaches like deep learning and reinforcement learning would fail. And so that's kind of interesting that all of these methods for measuring intelligence are not yet here. But if you believe in Ray Kurzweil, the singularity is right around the corner. And it's been right around the corner for over 20 years. So we'll see what happens. I have been a big proponent of the Lovelace test proposed by Summer Bringshort of Rensselaer Polytechnic, who says that computers will be creative if and when their output is um, beyond the explanation or intent of the original programmer. Now, this is becoming more and more difficult because you might get an output for your large language models that you didn't understand, and you say, wow, this is creative and was not in my intent. But then, in order to actually claim that, you would have to go back and look at all the corpus of material that was used to train that large language models and make sure that it was not in that corpus. So we've talked about George's model on AI and intelligence, and do you want to contrast that, George, with the Lovelace test?
Yeah. So one thing we talked in the previous episodes, right, was this what you refer to as strike of genius, right?
Yes.
And Lovelace tests come very close to the same definition as the one I give, but I think there's some fundamental differences. And the
Okay.
first one, I think we have to give the chance to AI to pass a test. So although very similar definitions, what I don't like about the Lovelace test, or what I would disagree with, let's say, is that, let's say I do design an AI that is truly intelligence, right? So that's at least what I claim. Then I cannot be surprised by its output. So it's kind of a contradictive term, as in, how can I be surprised if that's my intent.
Well,
You see what I mean?
I would maintain, George, that surprise is not the same thing as creativity. I've written a lot of programs, and I'm kind of surprised at the output, but I can usually go back and explain why that surprise happened. It's something that I programmed it to do. I might ask it to search through a billion different possibilities for a solution, and it comes out with one and said, "Wow, I wouldn't expect that. I'm surprising." But then I go back and look at the details, and I find that it's right. So I don't know if I would equate surprise with true creativity. So go ahead.
I
That's my
agree,
two
but
cents.
yeah, I know, I agree. I agree with that. What I'm saying though, in the Loveless test, if it's truly creative, I won't be able to explain how it came to that result,
Right.
right? But if I designed it like that, then I wouldn't be able to explain it anyway. So how do you see what I mean? So even if I intentionally design it to be creative, right? Then if there is such a path, then I'll be able to say here because I designed it like that. So I feel like that's where the contradiction comes. But moreover, is the problem is what does it mean not be able to explain? So, for example, in the previous episodes, we gave the example about the anecdote of the Newton and Newton observing the apple falling, and as it reaches the ground, right, and then from that extracts new knowledge that objects attract each other. So, how much information can I give until I say, "Oh yeah, I can I can see how it came with this result. It looked at this information and it extracted some pattern, right?" Because it's the problem you said before. I have to go back and check if that information was already in the data set. So how much information am I allowed to give you? So this is not well defined in the Loveless test. Where in my proposal, it's defined because I define what that means. I mean that means new functionality. So I can check what functions a system can do. I can find one it cannot, and then I can check, do you have information that you can extract this new functionality out of? So, for example, we talked about the 630 example, the clock that points at 630, where the AI can describe it like precisely in words, but it cannot generate an image because it cannot extract the knowledge from the information it actually provides to you. So it describes where the hands of the clock should be, but it cannot extract the functionality. And it's not like I disagree with the Lovely test, as in I feel like things are not well defined, right? So that's why I felt the urge to be like, we really have to define precisely what does it mean creativity, what does it mean um, general intelligence.
Well,
So
so
that's where,
let me
yeah,
ask you. You used the phrase. Suppose that we wrote software that was designed to be creative.
yeah.
Is that possible? How would we do that? How would we design an AI to be creative? I have no idea how to do that.
I
Is it
agree that
possible?
I agree that I don't see a path to it, but
Okay.
I want to leave this open. As in, I don't want to be too restrictive because then the counter argument would be your definition is such as to make it impossible. So I want to avoid this step, which sometimes people fall into, right? We fall into because we have our own preconceived biases. For example, I don't see a path to AGI, but I want to leave an open door where, yes, I can, if it's there, I will be able to detect it. It'll be like, okay,
You'll
I
be
was
able
wrong.
to detect it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. That's fair enough. What about application to other things? We actually talked about the idea of flash of genius. And I
right,
think that in order for AI to be creative, that's indeed what we're looking for in all of these tests for
exactly.
intelligence. We're looking for a flash of genius. And I think that it applies to human beings. Roger Penrose, in his book, The Emperor's New Mind, points out a number of different places where this flash of genius has occurred. You and I think anybody creative has had this flash of genius where you actually come up with a solution and it was nothing like you thought about. And you go, oh my gosh, where did that come from? And so the flash of geniuses do indeed occur. And so we can have this. And so these different models of intelligence, I think it's important that we apply it to other things. Now, you mentioned that your Turing test too can be applied to other things. Could you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so theoretically, at least, right? That's why, let's say, I really like that specific definition of functionality. like emerging functionality, let's say, generating functionality, is because theoretically at least it can be applied to any system. And what I mean by that, for example, one way I came with this idea is by saying, we talked about in the previous episodes, we look at humans as a system and we see how their technology evolved, right? So they advanced. We can look at other animals, and at least with the data we have today, we don't see that. We see that other animals live as they always lived. And an example would be, you might have a pet dog, right? And you teach it tricks, and it's learning the tricks, but then it won't learn anything else, right? It will still live in the same way. It won't take these tricks and try to build upon them. A similar example is you might have seen videos where people teach the sign language to apes and try to communicate with them. Okay, very nice, very interesting. It shows some aspects of intelligence, but is it general intelligent? If I take this ape and take it back to nature, will it use this communication to build a society? Will there be an advancement? Like we will see them to use new technology, right? Do some innovative things, new functionality. That's why functionality is important. And it's the same thing. And the same thing comes to anything else. Like, for example, one thing we mentioned is that humans typically have different levels of intelligence in different aspects like art,
Sure.
sports, science. And you can see that, for example, I like the example of NBA. Like if we look at NBA today, how it's played, the basketball game, right?
Oh,
It's,
NBA. Okay,
yeah,
yes.
NBA. It's very different if you look at the 60s. And what happened, right? So people started rethinking the game and saying, wait a second, maybe I don't need as much physical contact. Maybe um, I can shoot from the 3 point line or even further back. And statistically, even if I miss more because it's more points, it gives me a bigger chance to win. And people arrive to new functionality, new play styles that were not there before. We see athletes do new moves to trick their opponents, right? This is new functionality, and the game evolves. And you can see it if you look at a game back then and now, very different. Same with music. Same with, let's say, paintings. We can see new trends coming up. And I think this is exactly the new functionality. Sometimes people might think that we see that with AI, but what we see in AI is that um, it's a combination of what already exists right now. That's why I propose in the Turing Test 2.0, I propose specific rules that you have to apply, like having some functionality, having some information that you haven't extracted functionality out of it, and then no new information coming to the system. Can it extract um, new functionality out of it? So, for example, you could apply that, let's say, by saying, in going to the painting world and say, what was the different types, the different methods people use to paint, right? To paint pictures, and maybe we'll go back to, I don't know, the 800, and we only train the model with this type of images. Or you can go even further back, let's say the Stone Age, and you only have the pictures on the walls, right? That the primitive humans were doing. And you say, okay, I'll only give you these images. And maybe all the information that the humans had at that time. Can you come with more innovative images? So this is the
Yes.
idea of new functionality. You can observe it everywhere. You have some type of intelligence.
I think part of the intelligence you're talking about is the creative dimension. I
Exactly.
think that animals probably have a degree of creativity. You hear about the people that put a monkey in a little room and they hang bananas and they put a stick there and the monkey figures out how to use the stick to knock the bananas down. That's probably a low level of creativity. But I think the
Right.
higher level of creativity is probably limited to human beings and possibly our creator. What blows my mind is that everything that we have now, from computers to cars and this great lifestyle that we live, is made with stuff that was here on the earth 3,000 years ago.
Exactly.
And Oh my gosh, we have taken that. We have used our creativity to form the society that we have now. And this takes human creativity, and this human creativity is just awesome in what it can do. And now we're seeing this application to computers and artificial intelligence. It's just astonishing. All of the silicon, man, it was lying around on beaches, I think, right?
Exactly. So
And it was all there. We just figured out how to use it. And we made cars and computers and houses and skyscrapers and boats and explosives and all sorts of things.
yeah,
So,
good and bad.
what's that?
Good and bad
Good,
applications. Yeah.
good and bad. Exactly. I mean, it was there, but I do believe it does have its sort of limitations.
I like what you said. We learn how to use it, right? It was always there. The silicon always
It
had the
was
same
always
properties,
there. That's
right?
right.
We learned what that means. How? What is the functionality we can extract out of it?
Yes.
And that's the point. Yeah.
Yeah, and that goes back the simple example you gave about Newton seeing the apple fall from the tree, that old myth, and how he was able to use creativity to do great things. I don't think computers will ever be able to do that, and at least I would agree with you. I think you state it more safely. You don't see a path to it. I definitely do
Yeah.
not see a path to
Yeah.
it. So let me bring up a topic that I
Yeah.
didn't put down in the notes for you, but I'd be interested in your take on it. There was this recent article, I believe it was in Forbes, and I'll try to find it and put it in the podcast notes, that said we shouldn't be studying large language models. We should be studying puppy dogs. And they say, why should we be studying puppy dogs? Well, we should be using brains. It does turn out that that there's something that comes from the brain. And I believe, in fact, I edited a book called, or co-edited a book called Minding the Brain, that I believe that the mind is more than the brain, that we're more than computers made out of meat. The inability of AI to create, I think, is evidence of that. It isn't a proof, but I think it's certainly evidence. And so they were making the point that maybe in the future we could actually grow brains. And right now they take pigs and they grow like pancreases and livers and stuff. I
Mm.
don't know the details, but I asked a guy, could you grow a human brain on a pig? And they says, yeah, we could. And I just wonder what we could do with a
Mm.
computer with a human brain made out of meat, and whether that would be creative or not. I don't
Yeah.
think theologically or philosophically it would have a soul or a spirit at all, but is there something that we could tap in there? Do you have any thoughts on that? Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah. So lots of thoughts. Very interesting subject. I think when we think it like I like to break it down, right? And that's one aspect again of the Turing Test 2.0 is let's break it down. It means what does it mean to be intelligent? We said this new functionality. Okay, there's two paths to it. Either this thing is actually able to be done algorithmically or not. There's only two
Yes.
possible outcomes. So if you break it down like that, that's why I like to define it precisely so I can break it down like that. And then it's like, if it can't be done algorithmically, then eventually we will do it. It doesn't matter of time. You see what I mean? If it's an algorithm, maybe not now, maybe 100 years from now, doesn't matter. It will come down, right? We can even randomly just change things until we figure it out. Uh,
Maybe. Okay.
so it's the same thing with the brain. If it's an algorithm, then the brain itself should be sufficient. If it's not, so if we go to the other, then okay, we examine this case. What if it's not? Then I think this is like fundamentally like groundbreaking. If it's not, because then if algorithms cannot do it, then there's no path to it. There's no um, because sometimes we think about algorithms, and especially with AI, we think about it as a mysterious thing. What is an algorithm, right? Like AI, first of all, it's algorithms. Because
Yeah.
sometimes people forget about that.
Oh, in fact, if I could interject really quick,
Yeah,
this is a point that Roger Penrose makes in his book, The Emperor's New Mind. He says the computers are limited to algorithmic things. And we know, shoot, back in the 30s, Alan Turing showed the halting problem was non algorithmic. And now we know a bunch of things which are non algorithmic. There are a
right,
bunch of problems
right.
that computers will never solve. And
So
that's
if we
that's where the human mind comes in, I believe.
exactly, so if we think about the the algorithm. What is an algorithm? If somebody Googles the term, you can find a definition. It's not super precise, but you can find a definition. It's a finite steps, a process with finite steps that comes to an outcome. So you put an input, there's finite of processing steps, and the finite is very important because if it's not finite, then you never get an answer back.
Right.
So if it's finite like that, as we said, then all there it is this algorithm, and you can map it into different things, different Turing machines. The Turing machine might be a brain, it might be a modern computer, it might be anything we can define as a Turing machine. However, if it's not, then that's a big issue. Like it means there's something else. We don't know what it. Let me say, some people might disagree on what it is. But yeah, definitely then it's not the algorithm. The issue is not the algorithm. Uh, but in order to get either or, that's what I don't like when people talk about these things. In order to get either or, we have to actually first define what we're looking for and
Yep.
then prove its computability. If we can prove for or against it, which is then you have to actually prove it mathematically. Until then, the best thing we have is testing and see how close you're coming to this test. If somebody passes the test, this is proof enough that it exists. If we don't have anybody to pass the test, we are still though in the we don't know. Maybe somebody passes in the future, maybe not. Um, yeah, which I think it creates this interesting debate.
Okay, back to your paper. You
Yeah.
propose advanced versions of your tests, like the single discipline test and the generational test. How might these overcome weaknesses in simpler examples?
Yeah, so in the last episode, we talked about the tests that I show off in the paper, which is they're nice, intuitive tests like the clock, where they cannot produce a specific time, an image of a clock showing a specific time, but only 10 to because that's all the
Yeah,
images they
yeah,
have seen. And as you said, people can come and fix these things. We just give you a better data set, right? We balance the data set. You can fix these things. So these things can go away. So this is one of the problems. The other problem is sometimes it's very hard to figure out, as you said, what was in that training data set, right? In order
yeah.
to know if this is a stroke of genius, a new knowledge, or is it something that was already in the data set? And that's why I propose two other tests. I don't test them, but it's out there if somebody wants to use them. The single discipline test is what we talked about. The idea of there was actually a podcast I mentioned it before, where Sam Altman was in a podcast called Huge Conversations, and the interviewer
If
asked
by the
him,
way, if you could send me the link to that, I'd be happy to put it in the podcast
"Yeah,
notes
yeah,
for
of
people that
course,
are
yeah."
interested. Thank you.
And the interviewer asked him, "Let's assume I take your new, I think it's GPT-5 now. I train it only with Newton's uh, time of physics. So whatever
Right.
Newton knew, right? And Newton had a specific theory about how gravity works that today we know is wrong. Einstein told us uh, Newton's theory of gravity is wrong. Here is how it's done. Will GPT-5, having that knowledge, be able to gradually come to that conclusion? Sam's answer there was pretty much a little bit avoiding the answer, but he said pretty much that sometimes what we need is more data. But that's why I like the Turing Test 2.0. I'll give you the data. I'll just don't tell you how to interpret it. Right? That's the idea. So I don't want you to go to Einstein's theory. I'll do you a smaller step. I'll give you let's say, more relaxed version. Invent something new after Newton. Anything that came after that point. So I trained you with Newton's time physics, only physics. So it's easier to expect results. That's a single discipline test, only physics. And then I want you to figure out the next thing, whatever is that tiny new invention that was made. And we kind of touched on a bit on the previous episode, or if I'm not mistaken, where we talked about images.
Yes.
And you can have, I'll train you on the images of the primitive humans. It's all, let's say, images on stone, right? And then I'll see, can you come with new type of pictures, right?
Yeah.
Realism or something else, right? The same thing with any other aspect of intelligence, like sports. It can be science, it can be medicine, anything. So this is the single discipline test. I'll go back in history in a specific time where I knew what was all the information, all the knowledge at that time. I give all that knowledge, all that functionality to the system, plus the information we had at that time, which, as always, for example, currently we have some specific amount of knowledge. We're in the frontier of knowledge, right? There is
Yeah.
some of the things we have to remember. Some of the things we know today are wrong. There's some functionality we have it wrong. So if I go back in time, I can do that. Come on the time at that frontier. There's some things that we knew back then that were wrong, and we corrected them. Can AI do that? Can it get us a tiny leap? And it's easier to observe because we know what were the next steps. So it's easier to see what we're looking for, right? But
Yeah.
even that test is very hard, right? What does it mean to have all the knowledge of that time? Sometimes it's very hard to define that. It's very hard to make sure you didn't cheat even accidentally, because you have huge amount of data. Even accidentally, you might give data that you're not supposed to, and train your uh, AI with data you were not supposed to. So that's why then it comes the generational test. And the generation test is the same idea as humans. We see that we have a generation of humans teaching the next generation, the younger generation. The younger generation comes up, invents new things, teaches the next, and it keeps going. So this is evident when we look at humans and how the everything, technology, music, art, sports, evolved, right? We invent new things. So that is the ultimate, I would call the ultimate test. If an AI can only using the data it can generated AI data,
Yeah.
can train the next generation of AI, and then eventually come with new functionality that wasn't there before, being able to solve a problem that wasn't able to solve before, then we're going to have passing the Turing test 2.0. And actually, the funny part, as long as I thought that, I went to search it. I'm like, no way, somebody must have thought of that. And what was fun is that people actually use that not for the purpose of figuring out if model is intelligent, but rather to accelerate training, right? So they're like, rather than me having to give you data, let AI give you the data.
Yeah.
And what they observed is that we have generations of training. Not only the models don't become better, they actually become worse.
Well, in fact, I think that this phenomena is, I don't know if you've heard the term model collapse,
Exactly, yeah, yeah.
where they have tried to use AI to train better AI to train better AI. And it just, after a few generations, it becomes a blubbering idiot. So
Exactly,
something,
yeah.
so I think it's evidence. I don't think it's proof, but I think it's evidence that AI doesn't have the ability to write better AI. And this goes back to the idea that it can't be creative. So that
Exactly
ain't going to
that.
happen.
That's exactly my
Yeah.
point. And it's good to go to the, let's say, nuances of this thing, because there are solutions out there. For example, people say, okay, I'll train it with generated data, but also I'm going to introduce some data from some real data from humans in order to avoid the model collapse, right? But this thing, although it solves the problem or mitigates the problem, it breaks the third rule of Turing Test 2.0,
I see.
because
Yes.
you introduce functionality externally. And I want to mention that I didn't come with these rules in order to counter these arguments. I came with the rules first. And then I saw the test. I was like, oh, yeah, of course. In order to avoid this problem, you break the rules of the test. And that's kind of, I find it very interesting.
Very good. Well, let me end by asking you a question that a lot of people are talking about. There's people that believe, of course, this super intelligence is going to emerge, including Ray Kurzweil of Google, Yuval Noah Harari. The late Stephen Hawking believed in this, but his Nobel Prize buddy Roger Penrose did not believe in this. What are going to be the societal and ethical implications if one day AI demonstrably crosses your general intelligence threshold? What's going to be the impact? It's kind of scary, isn't it?
It's definitely, I want to say, weird to even think about that,
Weird.
right? Because what does that mean? It
Okay.
means, I guess, it means we have. First of all, what it means, right? It means that our type of creativity is just an algorithm, right? A lot of people already believe that. That's why they think. I think one of the things, right? People believe that we're gonna get there because if we're doing it and if we're just an algorithm.
Well, I tell people these people believe that we're computers made out of meat, and therefore, if we can create, then certainly, if we replicate ourselves in silicon, that it can create also. And I think
Right,
that
and I
that's a
think
vacuous model.
right, but it's logical. It's a logical extrapolation.
Well, it's logical if you, depending on your ideology.
I agree. I
Uh,
agree.
okay.
Yeah, I agree. But what I'm saying is, it's a kind of logical extrapolation. And the thing is, if this is really true, right, then you have a machine. We have to think about how humans run, right? Humans use these neurons that need, let's say, milliseconds. What is a millisecond for a computer? It's ages.
Yeah, it
Milliseconds to
is.
communicate. What is this? Like, we're talking about nanoseconds, right? The bandwidth of a computer. How much information can you intake? The latency, like from the time I ask you to do something until you give me a response. So if you truly have an algorithm that reaches that and is so much superior in hardware, right? Because it's not just software, it's also hardware. Then this is gonna be like a thing we cannot even imagine, right? We might be trying to imagine, but this is gonna be. It might be even the case where we cannot even understand it anymore. You know what I mean? And it might even be less useful in the end because
Less
it's like
useful.
less useful because imagine
Okay.
if you go to a kid that is in the first grade and you try to teach it general relativity.
Yes.
What is it going to learn? Nothing. You see what I mean? So it has to be at least gradual. Like it's going to be our teacher, so it has to be a good teacher. If it's not a good teacher, then it's not going to be good, very useful. You see what I mean?
Yep.
But yeah, it definitely it's very hard to predict what's going to happen. That's like just a take. I think all this talk, though, however, as you said, it's up on in this assumption: is this possible? And currently, I don't think we have at least a mathematical proof that this is possible. It's more like a belief or a hunch,
Yeah. Well, I
which
would
we
say
have
a,
to examine.
I would say a faith.
Yeah, I mean,
A
if it's a
faith.
belief, it's a faith. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's this number called Chaitin's number, which is astonishing from algorithmic information theory. If you knew this one number, you could prove or disprove all of the open mathematical problems that can be proved, that can be disproved with a single counterexample. It's an astonishing number, and Chaitin proved that it exists, and it exists. C++ has has a has a Chaitin number, as does Python. But you can also prove that it's unknowable. It might be that there are some things which are unknowable. Some things are true because they're true and are beyond computing or breaking down. So it could be that that's another answer to this. I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
Uh, yeah, I think what is after this, right? I think this is the nice question right now, right? Okay, if you have a good definition of general intelligence, then I think the next step is what exactly we discussed right now. Like, try to look at it and see, can we map
And
it
see
to an
if it can
algorithm
be
or
a
not? Yeah,
yes. I believe if you define AGI as climbing that mountain and standing on the top of it, I think that that currently the
yeah,
large language models get you to that top of that mountain quicker than anything else. I mean, all of the information that you have in Grok or ChatGPT is available in the library in the U.S. Library of Congress. It would just take you a long time in order to extract it, in order to
right.
get to the top of that mountain. But ChatGPT gets you there immediately.
Yeah.
So
So one more
that's the beauty of it.
point that I wanted to add is because we talked about what is going to be envisioned if it's if this thing actually becomes intelligent. One thing we have to always remember is the opposite, though. Like, what if it's not, right? And because if it's not, the problem is the other problem with AI. Typically, people think about AI, they're like, oh, the doom that is going to come if it gets super intelligent, it will destroy us all. But we don't think about the other side of the coin. If it's not truly intelligent, there's a fear of a false prophet. And what do I mean by that? Is
Yep.
we had this in our society multiple times. For example,
Yep.
we had the anchorman, the newsman. Whatever the newsman says is true because look at him, he's on the TV, dressed nicely, he knows what
Yeah.
he's talking about. Then we had scientists say, and oh yeah, if scientists say it, I don't know if you know the nice play, the nice wordplay that says scientists say that people are more likely to believe something if
Yeah.
scientists say it, right? And then after the scientists say, maybe we have, I Googled it, and then now we have AI said it. So this false prophet is an actual problem, especially when people over exaggerate its abilities. And then we might have this problem where we keep relying on AI that gives us data we already know. And then we keep putting out data that is generated by AI. AI uses this data to train again because on the internet, the more data generated by AI, the more the data that AI uses to train is artificially generated. And then
Yeah.
we have this closed loop where no new information, no new knowledge is produced. And then we have the same problem of a stagnation, of information stagnation, of a model collapse, where we don't produce anything, nothing else, because we rely on something we assume is truly intelligent, general intelligent, but it's not. And I think that's the other aspect of it that I have to be careful. As long as they don't pass the test, we have to remember all they produce now is what we know today, the frontier of knowledge. So in other words, if the frontier of knowledge today was Galileo's time, AI would insist that the Earth is not moving, it's in the center of the universe, and everything
Yeah.
spins around it. And we have to remember that,
Yep.
because then it becomes this problem where no, AI said it, yeah, but AI says what we think right now. That's why if you see AI playing chess, it plays like an average person because that's the average knowledge. It doesn't play like an expert,
Yep.
right? And I think that's very important to remember.
Wow. Well, thank you, George. I think this has been just a fascinating conversation. We've been talking to Dr. Yorgos Mappouras, known to his American friends as George, about his new interesting paper, Turing Test 2.0, The General Intelligence Threshold. Again, we're going to make a link to that on the podcast notes so that you can read that, as well as make available to links to other literature. And if George, if you could send me the URL to the
I will
to
do.
that
Yeah.
podcast, we can include that too. And so, thank you again. This has been a wonderful time. And until next time on Mind Matters News, be of good cheer.